Someone from our book launch team recently shared this, quote, "Thank you for putting words to so much of what I've experienced, and at the same time, the hope I have for a different imagination for what could be, what should be," end quote. And that's from a 51-year-old pastor. If you've ever felt like the Christianity you were handed doesn't match with the Jesus you read about, this book is for you. If you'd like to read a copy before it comes out, we'd love to have you join our book launch team. You can find out more at edgeoftheinside.com or at the link in the show notes. Welcome to another episode of Cabernet and Pray, where we sip the wine and we stir the faith. And today you are in for a good one. We've got Colten Barnaby, and this is one of those conversations. This could have been 4 hours long. I didn't even get to all my questions. Such a fascinating person with so many perspectives, and you are going to enjoy it today. Colten has been married to his wife for 12 years. He's the father of 2. He studied church history in undergrad and graduate school at Oral Roberts University, and he's got quite a few stories about that. He makes content on Instagram and TikTok, and it hasn't even been that long since he's been doing this and has absolutely blown up because he offers something that is so compelling, and you will see why soon. He writes weekly on his Substack, and he's got a podcast called Ask the Next Question. This is a guy who is an incredibly deep thinker and can translate that in ways that people like you and I can understand. And it is an incredible gift that he has to offer, incredible perspective, and I think you're really going to enjoy this. This is episode 65, The Atheist Pentecostal.
I've never shared this with anybody publicly.
If this was SportsCenter, that would be like such a hot take. Skip Bayless would have no idea. Stephen A. Smith would have no idea what to say if you drop that down. That is so good.
The joke I always say is like, how'd you learn so much? You got to drink a lot.
The power of food and beverage to lubricate an environment.
Resistance to change is hurting the church.
I'm not in the camp that God has a penis or a vagina or a body at all. I'm in the camp that God is a universal spirit.
This is the strangest podcast that I have been on. I don't even know what to do.
I'm kind of geeked up about this wine.
So this is my second glass, and it delivers a little more of a punch than I expected. So if I get a little loopy, it's your fault. You told me to drink on this show.
I will also say as a confession, I am a lightweight. So I've had like 3 sips of this wine, and I'm already feeling it. So this is fun.
You've uncovered the mystery. You've exposed the formula.
You've just duct taped together a number of things that aren't normally hanging out together, and I'm here for it.
We're going to sit down at a table, we're going to have a glass of wine and some food, and we're going to talk about the beauty of Jesus.
Thanks for what you're doing with this podcast and for the creative way you're doing it and the beautiful, positive spirit in which you're doing it.
I really appreciate this venue, what you're doing. It is fun, and yet you dig into the deep stuff.
I've heard about your podcast for a long time, and I love that you're a pastor and that you explore the world of faith through wine. That's very unique.
I never thought of church history in terms of wine drinkers. I love this question. Really got my mind rolling.
You had me with herbaceous notes, I want you to know. I'm ready to just stay here and live in the wine tour.
I will never forget the first time I bought a bottle of wine by myself, which was yesterday.
If you're familiar with drunk history, I thought it's like drunk theology. So I
got a little spicy there. It's the peach wine.
Apparently the wine is, here we are. Queer we are. Beer we are. No, it's wine, Jeremy.
By the way, drinking this Pinot Grigio at 3 o'clock in the afternoon is making me even more direct in my communication than I normally would be.
I know why you have your guests drink wine. It makes sense now. Yeah, I get it. A little bit of liquid courage to really unleash the beast.
I think you've got a good podcast. So throw in the wine bit in there. That's nice, doesn't it? Cabernet and Pray, yeah.
Well, I've got one of the friendliest faces calling out other people online. Welcome to the podcast, Colten.
Oh, no. That can't be what I'm known for.
This is what my wife and I talk about you. You literally are like throwing down with people, but you are so likable and you've got a smile on your face. And it's like, I don't have that. I don't have that quality. If I am going after someone, they feel it. And everybody's like, oh, this is intense. You are like, hey, let's have a hug. And I'm going to tell you why this is a horrible ideology. It's amazing.
Hey, we can be friends and you know, I can smack you down. Right? No,
yeah.
Dude, that's so funny because the whole internet culture, I got recently embroiled in a whole thing where I was like, oh, it's getting drawn into drama. And I was just like, I don't want this.
Well, you have the skill set for it. And so I'm just going to do a plug up front. After this episode, dear listener, you're going to want to go check him out on social media. It is worth the follow. The entertainment is on point, but also you have incredible, I don't know if you want to call them a hot take, but like you have a way of like, all right, here's a soundbite. I'm gonna quickly tell you why it doesn't make any sense, and I find it fascinating. So,
dude, thank you, man. I really appreciate. That means a lot coming from you because I really
you.
respect your work as well. So, anytime I can get feedback like that from somebody else I respect, it means a lot.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to have you on the pod today. We're going to go all over the place exploring your unique journey, and I'm excited to hear your perspective on stuff. Before we do, we've got to talk about some wine in our glasses, and so I will start us off, and then we'll see what you're drinking. Today, I've got a lovely Gamay Noir. This is a 2024 from Story of Soil in California. I'm a member of these guys, and this thing's beautiful. It's light. It's kind of like a little brother to Pinot Noir, which is my favorite. But I'm getting some great fruit notes. I'm getting raspberry, violet, but then I'm also getting some minerality. Now, some people, when I'm about to give a note, some people are going to like, what? I'm getting potting soil in this, which is actually very nice.
Wow.
It feels very earthy. Feels like you're drinking something that was from the soil in the best of ways. So I'm enjoying this. This is delightful. That's what I've got in my glass. Colten, what are you drinking today?
Man, well, normally, I'm a Boda Box connoisseur. Okay. I would never do anything, like Yellowfoot or Tail or whatever they call it. The high end stuff, Boda Box.
Yeah.
Sometimes on Easter, we'll pop out the black box.
Okay.
And but today, now don't laugh at me, folks. I'm going to try to pronounce this. I've got Garnacha Syrah.
Yeah.
From
You just got to say it confidently. That's the secret.
They'll never know.
They'll never know. If you say like you know what you're saying, they'll be like, all right, that sounds good.
This is Red Googly Moogly and it's from Esteban Martin, 2021. The special wooden crate variety from Costco.
Nice. So, do you like it?
Let's see. I love it. Doesn't quite live up. Somewhere in between Boda and black. What notes do I taste? Maybe like a grape flavor.
That's the one flavor you're not allowed to say.
Let's see. I would say, I do like the way that I feel like it falls over the back of my tongue.
Okay. Talking about mouthfeel.
Mouthfeel. One final sip. I don't want to say, this is going to sound crazy. I don't want to say like eraser, like back of the pencil eraser, but when you were a kid, I chewed on those a lot in school.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of getting a little bit of that, whatever that
I love
means.
that. That is a great tasting note. I love it when people make up random, like I'm pulling out a memory of something tasting notes, and you just did
It made me think of that. It made me think of sitting in Miss Sims' Algebra 2 class, just chewing on the back of a pencil, wondering what is she talking about.
Hey, cheers to you on a great tasting note, and cheers to you, listeners, if you are able to enjoy a glass with us on the pod today. All right, Colten, let's get into it. You and I are both preacher's kids, but I think you're like a third or fourth generation, right?
Yeah, my father is a Pentecostal pastor, my grandfather, and my great-grandfather was a Pentecostal pastor.
Okay, so what was that like being from such a lineage of pastors?
Well, I had to come up with what I thought was my Jonah story very early on, right? Every good preacher's kid, when they become a preacher, they've got to have a good Jonah story where they pretend that they never wanted to be a preacher and that they ran away from God's calling, and then God just kind of forced them back into it. And so that, for me, I spent a lot of time obsessing over, making sure everybody knew I never wanted to be a preacher, even though that was all I wanted. But I think that's like a universal PK experience, almost. Yes. I mean, near universal. And you'll notice your pastor probably preaches a sermon like that, y'all listeners, right? Not to hate on him, it's just what it is. And but it was interesting because we were in a church in North Philadelphia, that my grandmother and grandfather, they moved from South Bend, Indiana, where my great grandparents planted their church, which is they had their 100th anniversary a few years ago. I think it's about 106 years old now.
Wow.
Since they planted that church, and it's still going. My cousin pastors it today in South Bend, Indiana.
Oh, that's cool.
And my grandparents, they toured the country as itinerant evangelists. And their claim to fame was my grandpa preached a sermon every day, 7 days a week for 7 years. I don't know if that's true or legend or myth. I'm sure there had to be a sick day in there somewhere that they're fibbing about, but that was the deal. And then they moved to Philadelphia once they had their third kid, my father. They were on the road like that with 2 kids and planted this church in North Philly. And that's where I grew up. And it was interesting because we were oneness, holiness Pentecostals, which means a lot of restrictions, like women can't wear pants, makeup, jewelry, can't go to the movie theater, not supposed to watch TV. But we were in one of the poorest and most drug-infested, dangerous neighborhoods in Philadelphia where my grandparents planted, called Kensington. Go Google it after this. And just read some of the, I think the most recent New York Times article I saw about Kensington, the headline was, Kensington, the Walmart of heroin. And I was like, okay, great.
Wow, what a title.
So most people that came to our church were coming in right off of the street. I mean, we had girls that just got done working the Ave all night. They would come in the same clothes that they got done working in, and they'd be in church for Sunday service. We'd have guys that were, passing out high on heroin or methadone in the front row. And my family's philosophy wasn't, our job is to get them to follow our holiness standards. It was, we would rather them be in here in this state than out there in any state. And so they wanted to get them into the church. So it was a weird thing because entrenched in being a PK, but also all of my friends, all of my day-to-day life, the people that I saw were street people, we were from the hood. We lived in Section 8 housing. We didn't come in from the suburbs to do ministry. We lived right there. So it was a wild mix of things.
So was that a good experience for you? I mean, you clearly began your young preaching life, so you had to have some favorable, but was there moments where you're like, I hate this is horrible, or was it kind of all pretty cool as a kid?
Oh, there were times where I viscerally felt I hate this, but I had been conditioned to not be in touch with my visceral feelings and emotions and to reinterpret them as, we are suffering to build the kingdom. And so I really didn't have any room to understand those feelings as such. But when you're so poor that you're, heating up a hot water kettle to give your little, an electric water heater to give your infant sister a bath because you can't afford hot water, and people from the neighborhood are bringing you food that are their leftovers, and they're poor, but you're that poor. There was a lot of feeling of like wishing it didn't have to be that way, wish it didn't have to be dangerous. But I also learned, and I think I still carry a lot of this with me, that like my life is not necessarily for me. Now, I had to soften that, right? Because I think our lives in some ways are for us, but it's not just for us. We're meant for others as well. So, I have a complex relationship with that. And Jeremy, interestingly, this past March of 2025, our church building, which was built in like 1840s, big stone, beautiful cathedral, was a Methodist church originally, burnt to the ground. It took 100 firefighters 2 hours to put the fire out in Philly. And that was so I wrote about it on my Substack because it was so symbolic for me in so many ways of like kind of like the end, like the true end of a chapter of my life, but also emotional because that was where I spent all of my days, right? Like we were always in that church building. And so it's like the last stable edifice that represented my childhood is gone. Very complex emotions around that. But yeah, there was good to it and there was a lot of bad to it.
So one of the things as a preacher's kid growing up, I've heard about you is that you were a Bible quizzing champion.
Oh yeah.
I want to hear about that experience. And I think there's probably the majority of listeners to this podcast have no freaking clue what that is and are like, a what? He did a what? So enlighten us. What is a Bible quizzing champion?
Man, I went all the way to the Bible Bowl. Like we did the thing. So Bible quizzing was, and I got to imagine people in other denominations do this. I was in the United Pentecostal Church, the UPCI. They had a whole kind of league for Bible quizzing set up. And you would compete against other churches locally and then within your state, or we call it our district, and then you would go beyond that. Bible quizzing was the process of committing large portions of scripture to memory. You had to have a lot memorized. And you would go to these competitions. There'd be 4 or 5 of you sitting behind a table facing the audience. And there was a moderator or a game controller, whatever you call them, sitting in front of you. And there was a box with little controllers linked to it where you would press a button and it would light up. And so you had to hit that button first to be the first light to light up to get your first chance at answering the Bible quizzing question. And there were 2 basic different kinds. It would be, they would either start quoting a verse. It could be any random verse in the Bible. And your job was to tap the buzzer and finish quoting the verse before anybody else could.
Oh, not just say what it was. You had to finish it?
Finish it. Yeah. Finish it and say the citation for it, the reference. And then they would have ones where they would just say the reference and you had to hit the buzzer and then quote the verse. And so, that was it. And I was just, my whole life was like church stuff. So I didn't even do competitive sports or anything, but like that or like
competitive Bibling,
saying the books of the Bible faster than anybody else. This is where I found my worth and value as a child. How fast can I say all 66 books of the Bible?
What translation did you use as a Bible quizzer?
Oh, we were King James only.
Oh man.
King James only,
So you're a little kid rocking Old English.
Oh yeah.
So, you know what's interesting about that? To see you today, so obviously I didn't know that version of you, but it sounds like you were able to thrive in that environment. And there is a parallel today. You're using the same skill set in a very different way with what you do on your social media. Do you see parallels of that, of like, hey, I was kind of using that ability, but I'm not applying it the same way?
100%. Absolutely. Almost everything that I do with my social media, the skills that I needed to be able to do that decently well, I got as a child. The information that I then now input into those skills came in university and after studying throughout life. But, I like my posts, I all think about them as basically like structuring a sermon. Like every good sermon's got to have a good title, at least in our denomination. Like, if a good preacher would have a good title that caught you, that intrigued you, made you think, what could this even be about? And it was even better if it sounded like it was something bad, but you flipped it into being something good. And then you got to have 3 points as you go. So I kind of structure all of my content like that. And I think that my ability to memorize and learn the text early on really helped me to retain a lot of the knowledge that I had later. And I think I have a thing called aphantasia. I've never been tested for it, but I learned about, have you heard of aphantasia?
I have not. What is this?
So aphantasia is now a documented condition where most people are able to imagine pictures in their head. So if I say, think of an apple, you can think of an apple. If I tell you, think of your wife's face, you can think of her face. I can't do that. I have no image inside of my head. It's just blank when I try to imagine a picture, like a visual image. And I didn't understand that when everyone else says, imagine this in your head, that they were really doing it. I thought it was just like symbolic language or something. And then, in adulthood, I realized, oh, these people are really seeing pictures in their head. I don't. One of the things that a lot of people with aphantasia do is we kind of deal in words a lot more. And so, I think I've always had an affinity for remembering the content of things because my brain isn't clouded with the images of things. I don't know. But I think that has something to do with it.
That is fascinating because I will say when I watch some of your videos, I sometimes have the reaction like, you are just smarter than I am because you are able to take something super complex and then it's like, all right, here's a huge idea. I'm going to boil it down real fast for you and then like make sense of it. And I watch you do it and it's like, holy cow. Like you'll take an entire book, you'll take an entire theology or something and you'll just boil it down to some, application point. So it's fascinating if you're connecting like, hey, I don't see these images, I don't see pictures. I just see these ideas, but like, man, good on you then, because you have figured out how to use that as a skill rather than a weakness.
Or thank you, man. It's hard to hear compliments like that because I'm so mean to myself internally. I'm still working on that. But yeah, I've always been very passionate about explaining things clearly to people and understanding them as clearly as I can. And I think a part of that, Jeremy, was the background. Being a oneness, holiness Pentecostal means we were at odds with almost all of Christendom, because to be oneness meant we rejected the doctrine of the Trinity. So my family, for 4 generations of being pastors, did not believe in the Trinity. Our entire denomination, with hundreds of thousands of ministers in the denomination, thousands of churches across the U.S., do not believe in the Trinity. And so I believed with everything in me that if you wanted to be saved, you had to do what Peter said in Acts 2:38. Repent, be baptized, every one of you, in the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of sins, and ye will receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. In the name of Jesus. So that was what the distinction was. Trinitarians baptize in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We baptize in Jesus' name only. Sometimes you'll hear us referred to that way. And I'm not I'm not oneness anymore, but you would hear it referred to that way. The Jesus name only folks. And I felt like it was incumbent upon me to be able to witness to other fake Christians, false Christians, the majority of them, who are on their way to hell. And when I went to Oral Roberts University, that was my mission. I went there in my mind and with my dad's mind as a missionary to everybody at ORU that was going to hell, to evangelize them the gospel of Jesus name only baptism and try to get as many of them rebaptized. And I can think of, at least off the top of my head, one megachurch pastor today with a 15,000 person megachurch who I helped get convinced to get rebaptized in Jesus name only while I was at ORU. So I tried to be as effective as I could. And so I was like, well, these are really complex ideas. I've got to be able to explain this as clearly as I can, or they will go to hell and it'll be my fault. And so that meant I had to understand the concept really well. So I tried to break it. And so I've always just had that passion for asking the next question, right? Like the first stones that kind of started to fall for me were going to the movie theater, because I was asking at youth conference, like when the questions and answer sessions, hey, I know going to the movie theater is bad. I believe it. I'm not arguing with it, but I don't understand why, and I need you to help me understand why. And they'd give me the answer, and I'd be like, well, what about this? And eventually they would just get mad, thinking I'm being rebellious. I was actually just trying to make sure I could defend it to people to help them stop going to the movie theater so they wouldn't go to hell, because that was like a salvation issue,
It's so interesting in so many traditions, and you're reminding me of being in junior high. I was always very curious. And so, as a preacher's kid, I had a dad that I could be like, hey, explain this theology to me, or like, I don't understand this, or, whatever. And thankfully for my childhood, that was never discouraged. It was never like, hey, stop asking those questions. But I remember one time getting in a conversation with a Mormon girl who sat next to me. And, she would say these things like, well, Mormons and Christians are exactly the same. And I was like, not about to tolerate that as a junior high, very good Christian, evangelical. And so I remember I was like, no, actually, there's a lot of differences. And, here's some of the things that like you believe that we don't believe. And she's like, well, we don't believe those things. And I'm like, you do believe those things. And so I'm like telling her, this. And I look back on this and I'm like, I'm just such a different person now. But I made a little packet for her, like a 3-page packet of just Bible verses that were all things that she didn't know were in the Bible, that were like issues with what she believed. And I gave it to her, and it was like on a Friday. And I was like, hey, just read this over. I'm like, this is all in the Bible, whatever. She comes back that Monday, and I was so excited to like, all right, let's talk about it. And I kid you not, she's like, I talked with my bishop about it. I'm like, oh, and she's like, I'm not allowed to talk to you anymore.
No,
about faith. And I was like, because of Bible verses, like literally. And it was like, yeah, like just shut it down. And it's sadly, I've realized, as an adult and have learned a lot more of these kind of stories, it's so much a part of so many faith traditions of, this is the way we believe it. We don't believe it that way. And depending on how you ask the question, or if you ask too many, and, you strike me as someone who's just naturally curious, as am I. That's a liability if you have that personality growing up in a lot of these spaces.
Yeah, and it's like it's personally threatened to the person you're asking. be threatening to them because they don't actually know. They've positioned themselves as the person who knows things. And now what's not being communicated is you are now threatening to expose them, not only in front of you, but potentially in front of other people and to themselves as somebody who doesn't know the things that they purport to know.
Right.
And so if you ask too many, now I will say for my dad's sake, he never told me to not question. In fact, he would, looking back on it, he would wind me up and send me off to these things. He would he always encouraged me to ask. He bought me a book on world religions when I was 12. And he's like, hey, I want you to know to be a Christian like me, but not because I am, but because you got there on your own. That was like a value that he instilled in me. And so he would set me loose. I think my family always kind of pushed the mold in our denomination. Jeremy, I remember being at youth camp, and my grandfather used to be the general superintendent of our state, of our district. And there was like a lot of internal politics. And so like political enemies of my grandfather, other pastors, saw that my hair was below my ear. Now for guys, one of our holiness rules was your hair, you needed to kind of have white walls. Like you couldn't have hair long enough to touch your ear. You couldn't have long hair or facial hair. And so they saw that at the youth camp. It's like a week-long youth camp thing. And they pulled me aside. They pulled my grandfather into a meeting with like a bunch of other pastors. And they were like, Pastor Barnaby, like your grandson needs to have his hair shaved. Like we need to cut his hair. And they had like clippers, like ready to clip
right on the spot, huh?
Yeah, like they were trying to like make like some kind of like statement.
Okay.
And my grandfather had a TV, and that was like a big problem. And my grandpa, I'll never forget. He's just like, okay, we'll shave his head as long as anybody in here who has hair below their ears agrees that they'll all shave their heads as well. And everyone's like, they're looking at each other, no hair below their ears. They're all like, okay, great. And I feel like this is like my grandfather's like a Jesus moment, like confronting the Pharisees, and he goes, all right, well, it's time to inspect everyone. Pull down your pants, take off your shirts, and lift up your arms. I didn't understand it as a kid, but later it's explained to me, right? Like they all have armpit hair and pubic hair. They all have hair below their ears. And so he was saying like, if you want to come at us about the letter of the law right now, because my 8-year-old grandson or 7-year-old grandson has hair touching his ears, then we're going to go by the letter of the law. And so that kind of always taught me to push things a little bit. That spirit was in my family.
That's an incredible story.
Okay.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Okay,
He's a cool
so
dude.
you've got this huge foundation, very steeped in generations of this. Fast forward to you as an adult. You have described that your faith in God, to use your phrase, fell apart, is how I've heard you describe it. Talk us through that journey. How do you go from all of this, all the curiosity, all the certainty, all of the I know, to now going, yeah, that didn't work anymore. What was that like? What triggered that for you?
Great question. People have asked me before, when did you lose your faith? And I feel like it's such a strange question because it's like, well, when did you lose your keys? You don't know, because if you knew, they wouldn't be lost. You'd be able to go back exactly to where they were.
Right.
It's hard to say precisely when I lost my faith or belief in God. And I think about faith and belief a little differently too, but I can trace a sketch of it, right? So I get to ORU, and I'm very confident in what I believe. And a couple of things start to happen. Now, I always say if I had not gone to ORU or an equivalent type school, if I had gone to a non-religious like secular state school, today, I would be a Christian nationalist, fundamentalist, aspiring televangelist. Like that's what I would be doing with my life. And I say that because I went to college. My whole life, I felt like I was trained in an apologetic approach to be able to defeat whatever atheist professor tried to persuade me of evolution. When I got to college, I was ready to destroy them and convince them that the earth was 6,000 years old. But instead, I got to a Christian university with Christian professors, charismatic professors that spoke in tongues. Everyone, that's the kind of vibe of ORU, right? Tongue-talking, holy rolling, born-again, heaven-bound believers in the liberating power of Jesus' name and whatnot. And they are biology professors who are PhDs in biology, and so they're like, yeah, evolution is real. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. You're not an atheist guy telling me you believe in evolution. You're a tongue-talking, charismatic, evangelical Christian telling me you believe in evolution. So I was a little more open, a little more inquisitive. My guard and defense was a little bit further down. I went into all of the dorms at ORU have a student chaplain, and then there's a head chaplain. And I went into the head chaplain's room. He's the senior getting ready to graduate. And his name is Michael Romero. Love this guy. And he's got a picture, posters. This is in 2007, going into the 07-08 election time. So this is during the primary, or right towards the end of the primaries. And he's got a Barack Obama and a Hillary Clinton poster on the wall. And I'm like, is this a prank? What is this? You're a Christian. You can't have a Barack. And I come to find out he's a Democrat. Several of the other students from his church in Austin, Texas that came were Democrats. And that kind of exploded my mind. I would have never entertained anything from a Democrat before. And then I take Church History 101. I was there to study pre-law. I took one Church History 101 class because people said, hey, this is a rigorous class. This is really good. And I was like, all right, well, I want to know more about the beginning of Christianity so I can show people why we have the faith of Paul and Silas. And it's good enough for us. So why isn't it good enough for you? Leave your Trinitarian ways. Be rebaptized in Jesus' name.
Leave your Trinitarian ways, you pagan.
And basically, and then I take this Church History 101 class from the loveliest man I've ever met, named Dr. James Shelton, who's a Catholic Pentecostal, or a Pentecostal Catholic. Guy starts off Pentecostal, gets persuaded of that the Catholic Church is the one true church, and embraces that kind of post-Vatican II charismatic renewal within the Catholic Church. So he's got the best of both worlds rocking for him over there. And I start to be exposed to the writings of Ignatius and Irenaeus and Clement and Polycarp and Justin Martyr, right? And Tertullian. And I'm going, man, almost everything these guys are saying, not just the Trinity piece, so much of it stands in such stark opposition to what I believe. But I think, so am I to believe that me, Colten, in the 21st century, am the one to stand over and judge these men, many of whom were either trained by apostles themselves or by the students of the apostles themselves? They're within 1 to 2 generations of Jesus. I'm to judge them and tell them. And I became persuaded that, I shouldn't just believe anything an early church father says because they're an early church father. In fact, there was a lot of diversity of thought and opinion there. But that whatever they believed that seems to work together, if it stands in stark opposition, then I should hold my current belief in high suspicion. So the first thing that fell apart for me was reading Greg Boyd's book, Oneness, Pentecostals, and the Trinity, which I don't know a lot of people even know he wrote that book. Yeah, I know you're very familiar with Greg Boyd's work, right? You probably, yes. I think you know him.
Yeah, he's been a mentor to me for many years.
Okay, I've never met him, but he's been a mentor for me for many years as well. And he came out of the same denomination I came out of, the United Pentecostal Church. I don't know if has he ever told you about that. I don't know if he talks about his teenage years.
He has so many stories spanning so many traditions that it's like hard to keep up with him.
Can't get it all. So he came out of that, he goes to, I don't know, what do you go to, like Princeton or Harvard or Yale or something for divinity school? I mean, like incredible pedigree of education. And he comes out a Trinitarian and he writes this book, Oneness, Pentecostals, and the Trinity. And I read it and it just shook me to the core. That coupled with Church History 101, I changed my major to church history.
Wow.
And I embraced the doctrine of the Trinity at that point in my life. And he influenced me in many other ways, right? He's the first person to ever introduce a question that has remained unbelievably fundamental to my pursuit of understanding, which is what makes God praiseworthy? Okay, God might be God. He might be the most powerful, but that doesn't make him worthy of praise. That doesn't make him good. What is it about the character and nature of God that not only makes us fear him, but want to praise him? So Greg Boyd really for me was this kind of this nexus, this whirlwind. I think I was a youth pastor for 6 years. I think every sermon I ever preached was just watching his sermon from the week before, taking notes and then ripping it like entirely. To
I think a lot of preachers have done that. Yeah.
And maybe that's where I got a decent at like explaining things, because he's such a good communicator already. So he's already distilling stuff that's complicated down to a great level. And then I would then take that and try to distill that down for middle schoolers and high school and college age students, and try to deliver that there. So that journey, once I realized the fundamental building block that my entire principle of foundation of faith, like the biggest salvation issue, was unsettled, I thought, you know what? I'm not here to win an argument. I'm not in life to have been right and defend what I believe. I want to understand. My from Bible quizzing days, the fundamental verse in my life has always been, I think, Proverbs 4:7. I say probably. I'm a little shaky on my Bible quizzing these days. Proverbs 4:7, which says, "In all thy getting, get understanding." And I've always felt like, man, no, I can get all this other stuff, but if I don't get understanding, if I don't get wisdom, if I don't, why should I be scared to pull at the root of truth? And so I just pulled at that root, and I continued to follow that to where I'm at today. And I think there's a lot of steps in between here, but if we could sketch from that to David Bentley Hart's book, That All Shall Be Saved. Reading that, I felt like I was losing my faith, like I had lost my faith. I was on staff at a Hillsong church in Chicago during this time, and I'm reading David Bentley Hart's book. You ever like you arrive places internally, but you don't know how to defend them, so you don't really even admit it to yourself. So I'd already really felt like I couldn't embrace a doctrine of eternal damnation, and it felt like I needed to embrace universal salvation as a doctrine. I had already felt like beyond that, I didn't really believe in God. But it was that book specifically, the line of reason, because he does such a good job in that book of annihilating, in my opinion, every doctrine or philosophical framework to support what he calls the infernalist view, or the view of a hell of eternal conscious torment. It gave me the confidence to be like, all right, yeah, this is what I believe too. And so David Bentley Hart does such a phenomenal job of defeating all of the infernalist ideas around hell of eternal conscious torment, especially gave me the confidence to say, I trust my inner sense, my intuitive sense of right and wrong. Because before he gets into all of his great hermeneutical arguments, exegetical arguments, philosophical arguments, he tells a story where he's reading this story about Abba Macarius, a desert father, and he's going, wow, this desert father has more compassion and grace than God does in the story. I would never send anybody to a hell of eternal conscious torment or something for not assenting intellectually to a certain worldview. What's wrong with this God, right? So that gave me this sense of confidence in stepping out a little bit. But between that and his book, The Doors of the Sea, in which he confronts the problem of evil, or what we call theodicy, he essentially gets to the end, he essentially says, there is no good theodicy. There is no good theology around the suffering of evil that explains it away. It's awful. It's bad. It's unjustifiable. And we really don't know. I really don't know how to talk about it. And I'm sympathetic to anybody who doesn't believe in God because of that. Now, between that and that all shall be saved, when he gets to that all shall be saved, one of the arguments that he makes there is there's this this appeal usually in the infernalist camp, people who believe in a hell of eternal conscious torment, that appeals to like our sense of freedom. That, well, God loves us. He gives us freedom. He's a gentleman. C.S. Lewis, the gates of hell are closed, locked from the inside, not the outside.
Right.
Type deal. And so you choose hell. God doesn't choose hell for you. And David Bentley Hart's like, well, that makes no sense, right? Like that would be an insane, no sane person would choose a hell of eternal conscious torment over eternal bliss. If they choose it, it's because they think they're choosing something else, which means they weren't actually making the real choice. So that God is then making them choose between something they don't fully understand or letting an insane person make an insane choice that they then have to suffer forever. And that's a very depleted, watered down version of his argument. It's much more robust, so don't judge him on my retelling.
But I think you're spot on. That to me is the most brilliant part of that book. That got me over the line that I was, because I was like, God wouldn't negate free will. And then the way he explains free will in that book, I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. Like this is free will, you know?
Yes.
So yeah, you're spot on that.
So and then so I basically get to that point, and then I go, well, why don't we extrapolate this out even further? I would never create knowing that it would lead to the suffering of my creation. Like, here's what I mean. If I could, and I can't see the future, but if God can quote unquote see the future, which I know Greg Boyd has an answer for this, right? But like if I could tell, or to use better language for those of you who read Greg Boyd before and understand process theology or open theism, if I could understand with perfect clarity every probability as though it were a certainty and project out into the future all of the different ways this could play out, if I know that having a baby today, we conceive today, it has X amount of probability to lead to this child suffering tremendous torment, being taken, abused, and then dying an early death, where all of their suffering can never actually convert or turn into anything that builds character. Because people always like to say, well, suffering builds character. Not all suffering builds character. And I wouldn't have that child. I'd wait till tomorrow. I'd use my probability inducing ways to find a time that it wouldn't, where the probability would decrease. Or if I couldn't find that, I would not create. And so for me, it's about creation and accountability. A God who creates, knowing that there's a good chance, right? David Bazan, I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's my favorite singer-songwriter. I only really listen to hip hop and black gospel music, but I also listen to David Bazan. He's like the only white people.
He has like I forget what he calls it, like a dark Christmas album or something that I play every year. I have a record of it.
Yes, okay. I love that you are familiar with David Bazan. So he has this song on his Curse Your Branches albums called Did You Push Us When We Fell? Where he says, when you set the table, when you chose the scale, did you write a riddle that you knew they would fail? Did you make them tremble so they would tell the tale? Did you push us when we fell? And even if you go outside of Calvinism, which is the doctrine he's clearly critiquing there, if you just say, did you know this probably would happen? Then you kind of push us when we fell, man. And it became very hard for me to affirm belief in a divinity of goodness. Now, since then, right? Not since then, applying that then to understanding what I know about classical theism, which rejects that kind of anthropomorphized vision of God I'm critiquing right there, right? And says God is not a individual like you or me, is a created being that thinks in time and space and therefore make deliberative decisions or have a deliberative will, but God instead is the ground of all being, the source of all goodness. He is will itself. All of our will and personality flows from the personality and will of God. It's different. I got to the point now where I can accept that as a reasonable explanation and description of God. The only thing keeping me from saying, okay, I believe again, is I don't know, dude. I lost somewhere in the middle of that. I lost my faith. And even though I can I found like what I think is an intellectually verified, like discernible, credible way of understanding God in a way that doesn't make him a monster, I just haven't been able to pick it back up again. But I'm totally open to it. I talked to a lot of my Christian friends or people that I talk to will tell me, I'm praying that you find your faith again. Some people will be offended by that in the atheist community. I consider myself an atheist. I'm like, hey, great. Like, you believe in this? You want it for me? You think it's good for you? I hope I find it too, but I'm not going to pretend like I did.
Do you think it would feel like intellectual dishonesty to you to do that? Is that, you think, one of the rubs?
It would feel like, you could call it intellectual dishonesty. I might just call it dishonest. It would feel like I was lying to other people, like I was lying to myself. If God ends up being real, like I'm lying to him. So let's just think about it like this. If God is real, who are we fooling here? He knows I either believe or I don't believe. I could pretend to believe till I'm blue in the face. It doesn't change anything. And there's a professor at a Florida University of Florida. I think he was at Georgia before, named Neil. I can't believe him. I'll think of it in a minute. He's fantastic. But he has this great book called Religion is Make-Believe. And I'm going to feel terrible because I know this guy's name so well. And no, it's just slipping. I really like him. He was on Dan McClellan's podcast not that long ago talking about his book. After I made a video about it, I was like, I'll let my narcissistic side believe that Dan saw my video and then decided, which is definitely not what happened. Where he makes this distinction between beliefs and credences. And so he says he thinks that a lot of people who believe in God don't actually believe in God. They have religious credences that they hold to, things that they creedally believe. But when you really get down to brass tacks, their actions and the way they live in the world, not just in one instance, because you might have one instance of infidelity to your true beliefs, but in almost nearly every instance, don't hold up to actually believing in that. Like, for example, the tradition we grew up in believed in radical healing. So you lay hands on somebody with faith in Jesus' name, they will be healed. We will raise the dead. You know, you got, what's his name? Smith Wigglesworth out here in Crusades punching armless babies, and arms are growing out of the babies, new arms. You know what I mean? We believe this stuff. Yet every time I was severely injured, in addition to praying, before they stopped to pray for it, they called 911 to get the ambulance out here. Right. Now, I'm not saying you can't believe in divine healing and also believe in medical. But if you believe in divine healing to the extent that, like, we can raise the dead, you know, I don't know who it was, Tipton. I don't know if you know who Robert Tipton is, the old televangelist. You know, I have the great clip from him where he's like, "We've seen midgets grow," which that might be offensive. I'm sorry, I'm quoting. And, you know, if you have that kind of belief in healing, but the first thing you do is call 911, then it's kind of, to me, betraying. Underneath of that credence is your true belief that if we don't get the ambulance here fast, it's going to get bad.
You know, you're poking at something that anybody who maintains a belief in God has to wrestle with. And it reminds me of a few years back, I don't know if you followed this, but when one of the worship leaders at Bethel had a child that died at like 2 years old, and it was this tragic death. And then her and her husband came out and said, we believe God's going to resurrect our child. And they got everybody in the church to pray. And it became like this daily update where they would post on social media, "Hey, we're praying," you know, and it was like, grotesque. I remember watching it. It was just gut wrenching because I'm like, here are two parents grieving just a senseless loss that, you know, none of us would have any ability to make sense of. And in their grieving, then they're adding this hope, which intellectually we would say, yeah, I understand why they're saying that, right? Because, like, you could definitely take that from the text. But then emotionally, I'm going, don't do this, right? Because, like, now you're adding a disappointment. And I think that's the tension there of, like, we say we make room for these things, but we kind of functionally act probably more like atheists than we are comfortable admitting.
100%. Yeah. And that's what I usually say there is, and to the people who really do believe, we call them lunatics.
Right.
Even within the church. Like the example you just gave, most Christians that do believe in divine healing would look at that and go, what the heck is wrong with you guys? What are you doing? You know, I think about fall revival at Oral Roberts, where I went to school, where I think it was a guy named Daniel Kalinda, an evangelist, big time evangelist over in Africa and all around the world. And he brought my friend on stage. I won't say my friend's name, who is deaf in one ear. He's going to do healings. Is there anybody out there who's deaf? Well, my friend raises his hand. People point to him. He gets brought up on stage. And they start praying for him to hear. And they're snapping in his ear. And it doesn't happen. Now, normally you're going to see the power of suggestion is strong enough. I think my friend might have had enough late night conversations with me in the dorm to not fall prey as easily to that. Might what was happening there. Oh, I poked at him a little too. And everybody was mad at this evangelist. Everybody was mad. The school administrators were mad. The professors were mad. The student leadership was mad because he humiliated him, made him look like it was his fault because he didn't have enough faith, blah, blah, blah. Yet, what else was he supposed to do if we all say we are here at Oral Roberts University? That one of the premier healing evangelists in history, Oral Roberts, we're at his school and we're saying we're going to heal his ear. And I just knew right then, I was like, nobody here believes that God's going to hear. They hope it happens. But there's a difference between hoping something, wanting something to be true, and believing that it is true.
That's so good, Colten. And share as much or as little as you feel comfortable with this, but what has been your family's response to this journey of yours?
Great question, because it's hard to say, because so many of the positions that I arrived at over time. The publicly saying I don't believe in God thing started in July. of me. I told my friends that, my wife knew that, but me saying it on social media started in like July of this last year, 2025. So, but all of the things that I would talk about theologically, I was there already, like on most of this stuff a long time ago. And so my family on that side of things, my mom just like listens to anything I say and usually changes her mind to believe what I believe. Like she's reasonable and rational, but she also holds the thing like, she still believes in divine healing. She would tell you today that God healed her of cancer. I don't know. I don't know what to say to that, right? Maybe he did or he didn't, right? But she believes that. I don't necessarily feel strongly about that as somebody who doesn't believe in God at all. But my dad, less interested in talking to me about the things that we disagree with. Just, we don't need to argue. We don't need to disagree. Still a strong bond of love. Like I love my dad and mom to death. They love me to death. They've always told me since a young kid, no matter what you believe or what you think, you're always our son first and foremost. I was like, and I think that gave me a lot of confidence to step out and just question things, honestly. Today, saying I don't believe in God, my mom is like concerned, worried, but no change in connection or relationship. My dad has never addressed any of the things I've said online since I started posting online in July, which is when I started, when I posted my first video on Instagram or on TikTok, and then Instagram in August. So I know we disagree. We just, here's how I feel about it. I'm interested in talking about these things with anybody. I would love to talk to my parents about these things. What do I think? Like I'm right about everything and they're wrong about everything. And if I convince them to agree with me on everything, something radical is going to change in the world. No, like they're getting old. They believe what they believe. I love them. Right. I want to influence younger people more than I want to influence people that are, on that second half or last third of life, and I mean, hopefully they live 50 more years, but
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's for a lot of people listening to this. That's where this gets very personal is when you start, and it doesn't have to be full blown, I'm an atheist now, but just saying, hey, here's this thing that my tribe has believed and I don't believe that thing anymore. Like I think, when I changed my view because of the same book you're referencing was The Final Straw, David Bentley Hart's book. That was the final view where I was like, all right, I believe this. And like, he gave me the intellectual permission to like make sense of it fully, and I always joke about like with Greg Boyd that annihilationism was my gateway drug. Cause like, that's how I got out of eternal conscious torment, Yeah. It was like, all right, I could put a foot in this camp and it doesn't feel totally heretical. But the moment I said, yeah, actually I'm not an annihilationist anymore. I'm Christian Universalist. It was like, just walls go up. And, people in a lot of the evangelical circles I come from probably don't know if they would consider me a Christian anymore.
Yeah, sure.
Of that. And so I think people have this where it's like, okay, we're exploring these ideas and it's fun to have a glass of wine and talk about these ideas on a podcast where there's no hate here. There's just love and openness and like, let's discuss this. But when these ideas get carried out into family dynamics and friendships, it's like, and I might get messages, which I imagine you do too, but I get messages every single week from people like, hey, here's what I'm going through. I got a message today, this morning, I was talking about how do you navigate if someone you love has become Christian nationalist, and someone messaged me and said, what do you do if it's your spouse?
Yeah. Wow.
And I could just like feel the weight of that, of like, this is the person I love the most. It's like who has gone down this road, and it's like, how do I then navigate it? And so I think ideas have consequences, right? So it's like, it's not like we have these ideas in a vacuum. We have them relationally. And so I think it's helpful. I'm just grateful that, you've shared so much of your story with us today and just the dynamics of what it's meant to you. Cause I think for a lot of people, they just need to know it's okay to change your mind. It's okay to have people that maybe struggle with where you land.
Yeah. And I think don't close your mind. Like I'm not like, I'm an atheist now and I'm going to argue and debate Christians and convince them that, do you have something new you can teach me? Maybe I have something new I can teach you. I just want to understand things better. Whatever the truth is, I'm not afraid of it. And I think that's just so important. But I get that alienation and that fear. In fact, the reason, Jeremy, are we trying to wrap right now? I don't know. Do you want me to stop talking?
No, this is good.
That was such like a good, like the way you did all of that right then. It was like, this is.
That's just me like
this
having
might
a
be a
heart
wrap.
moment going like, I'm just connecting. So many people are going to hear you and be like, oh man, that's my journey to some extent.
You just did it so well. I was like, this might be a wrap. Oh, that was really good. So, like the reason I posted in July and the reason I started a Substack was I had not talked publicly about any of my beliefs politically, theologically in 13 years. I'm a financial advisor. That's what I do full time. People are always like shocked.
That is shocking. I'm going to be honest with you.
And, because I worked at a church for 6 years. Great church. I'm friends with the people. Pastor Ed Gunger, and, they got Dr. Chris Green and Jonathan Martin were like teaching pastors while I was there. And I loved everybody there. They fired me. And I still went to church there for 6 years after they fired me. But after that, I got a job selling cars for a year. Then I got into financial services. And that's just where I was. I applied to work at 30 churches. Everybody at Sanctuary was super gracious to me. It was like a financial reason that they fired me, lay off. I think there was more ideological stuff of parents being upset that I didn't tell them their friend from school, their kid's friend from school was going to go to hell. There was like a problem there, and because he was gay, and which none of the pastors at that church believed. Anyways, it just was a problem. So I applied to work at like 30 churches. Nobody wanted me. And I had great references. Like all the staff at Sanctuary, the church I was at, they all like gave me great references. And nothing, man. Just nothing. And there's some hilarious rejection stories in there. I got told some of the wildest stuff about why I didn't get chosen. And so I go to work as a financial advisor. And now I'm in a space where I don't want to alienate potential clients, not because I care more about getting rich than I care about truth, but because like I was broke and my wife was teaching first grade in Tulsa, Oklahoma, like one of the lowest teacher paying states in the country. I had $180,000 of student loans from 2 theology degrees. And, I was not good at sales. So I was like struggling to make it work and I couldn't afford to lose one client over an opinion, And so then as my network grew in mentors in business, peers in business, all of them are very right-wing conservative Christians, like everybody in that like sphere. Right. And, I just was like, man, I don't want to lose relationships. I don't want to lose mentors. I don't want to. And so I just muted myself and I developed this really bad fear of rejection. I even backslid for a while away from the based good theology I developed. And then I went to work for a Hillsong church. Like my wife at this point, she's like, doesn't even believe in God earlier than me. She's like, why are you doing this? Why are you going on staff at this Hillsong church while you're, I was also a financial advisor and I was on staff at this church. And it was just like, man, I craved and longed for the approval of the people who I related to and resonated with. Like that world is my world. Today, I call myself an atheist Pentecostal because if you want to take Pentecostal away from, you're going to pry it out of my cold, dead, morbid, rigid fingers, because that is my entire culture and heritage. That is how I see and understand the world. I still mostly listen to Fred Hampton when I'm in the car, or Fred Hammond when I'm in the car. I always say that on a podcast. Anytime I reference Fred Hammond, I should call him Fred Hampton. I listen to Fred Hampton too. Love Black Panther. And, I call myself that. I just wanted that approval, but I had realized I was muting myself. I was denying myself. I was never showing up almost anywhere as the full representation of who I always was. I was always cutting off, castrating parts of my identity. And my therapist like, you got to stop doing this, man. Like we need to, you got to work through this fear. And so he had me take steps. The first step, I started a Substack, and that was low stakes. Nobody read it, right? Just like 10 friends of mine would like look at my Substack. And I did that from January through July. Every week I put out a new article on Substack, just kind of whatever was on my mind, what I was thinking about. And then in July, he's like, hey, let's push this out a little bit further. Why don't you make a TikTok? Nobody follows you. Post a video on TikTok. Just say something you're afraid everybody that you're afraid would reject you for, and put it out there in your style. And I did it. And then that video got 2.3 million views.
Gosh.
And I was like, what? I'm going to fire my therapist. He said nobody would see this. Like, this is a disaster.
I think he's your business coach, actually.
Yeah, exactly. He's my business. He is in many ways, right? Actually. And, I got Eminem lyrics in my head, right? This is a disaster, such a catastrophe for you to see. So damn how much of my ask you ask for me. Anyways, I don't know. That just happened. Anyways. And then I'm like, all right, well, I'll post another one. And it's just on TikTok. I'm like, most people don't have TikTok. And then he's like, dude, this is like, you're being your true self. And like, you have invested, because I never stopped reading theology, never stopped reading philosophy, never stopped reading political theory, just always consumed it and talked to my close friends about it. And my wife, which I'm blessed with a lot of close friends from ORU, understand we have similar backgrounds and developed in similar ways. And so he's like, this is what you're supposed to do, man. Like, do this. And so I just kept doing it. So I'm not saying whoever's out there listening to my voice, I'm not telling you this to say you're supposed to be a TikToker or Instagrammer. That's not necessarily what I mean. But you know what? I think there are people that have rejected me because I've done this. And I just don't know, because we just haven't talked about it. But I am lucky enough that it's none of the people that I care about the most. And I think a big part of that is because I'm realizing my journey doesn't have to be their journey. I think one of the things that both sides do is we feel like everybody around us has to agree with us. I realized I was afraid of people rejecting me if they knew what I believed. But my therapist pointed out to me, Colten, you know what they believe. It couldn't be further from what you believe, and you're not rejecting them. So if you have space for them and they don't have space for you, you're not rejecting them, they're rejecting you. You can't do anything about that. Why do you want to be in a relationship with people who only love you for somebody that's not really you? That wouldn't want to be in a relationship with you if they knew who you really were or what you really think. And you know what? I think for every relationship that I've lost in this process, I've gained friendships that will last forever. I've built amazing relationships with people that I've just met online from talking about this kind of stuff. And I think if you have that attitude of like, when I'm around my parents, I don't care what my dad believes. He's been wrong for 68 years. And I loved him then. Like, what's it going to, why does it matter? But I just, I don't need to bring it up. And I tell him, I think like what he told me as a child, no matter where you go or what you believe, I'm always going to love you. When I'm with my dad or when I talk to him, Dad, I just want you to know how grateful I am for how much you gave me. And it wasn't anything material, right? Because that didn't happen. But like, he gave me so much more than material things. I'm grateful I tell him all the time, Dad, thank you for teaching me the lessons you taught me. Thank you for helping me see the world. Thank you for loving me. I love you. You're such a great father. I want to be as good of a father as you. And you can honor your parents that way. Now, some people are in situations where just that's not going to happen because their parents are going to cut them out. I think that my dad being a pastor's kid himself, he's already disillusioned to a lot of stuff. Like average churchgoer is almost always, in my experience, more devout and extreme in their faith than their pastor actually is at home. Yeah. And I've been around a lot of pastors just like you have. So you might corroborate that or disagree. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Man, that's a word for someone today, Colten. That is so good. Okay, I have like a bunch of other questions that I want to ask you that I would take your entire day. So I'm not going to do that. We're going to go to our speed round, which are the questions I ask everybody. And we get to compare your answers to everyone else's answers. So we'll start with this. And just for the record, I have some killer questions I wanted to ask you that we don't even have time for, but you are such a fascinating person. We might have to do round 2 of this. Okay, so here's where we go. If you were to think about one of the best glasses you've ever had of wine in your life, is there a story that comes to your mind? Was it a specific bottle, place, people you were with? Do you have anything? What's the best wine you've ever had?
The best wine I ever had, I can't tell you what it was called, but I know when it was, and I remember tasting it, and I remember thinking, like, this is the best wine I've ever had, was at a wine tasting with somebody from church here in Chicago that I worked at. They hired, like, a sommelier to come in, and they brought in a bunch of wines. They brought in all of these different food pairings that went along with each different wine, and they had us, like, gave us a little notepad. He taught us how to smell it. How to get your nose in there, really, how to twirl different types of wine, and then what to eat to pair with it. And then he had us like write down our tasting notes, and then we review them and talked about them. He gave us his tasting. And there was something about that experience that made every single glass of wine there so much more enjoyable, because I was so much more present in the experience of tasting them than I had been when I'm just throwing back a Boda. You know what I mean? I think one of the best pictures anybody has for me in college that I wish would get deleted is a picture of, okay, you can cut this. If you need to cut this, I don't know if this is appropriate to say. At Oral Roberts University, standing in the middle of the dorm hallway, standing completely naked with a box of Franzia, just like straight dropping right into my mouth, right? So that was how I learned how to drink wine.
Wow.
So this experience, totally different. And I can't say exactly what it was, but like what kind of wine, because we tried several different, but there was that experience of being like fully present and slowing down, taking time to really like experience it. I've never drank wine the same since that. Even though I don't drink much alcohol now because of I'm an extreme calorie counter. I've lost 150 pounds in the last couple of years. And so I just can't usually afford I fasted until today because I'm going to have wine. So I don't do it that often, but the experience is completely different because I sit, I try to make sure I smell it. I look it up even after I've had my first couple of sips, I'll look it up. So that's my answer to that. I wish I knew what it was called, but I'm not good with that kind of stuff.
That's an amazing answer. Well done. All right. Which church or which member of church history would you trust to pick out a bottle of wine for you? And who would you not trust and why?
This is a good question. What figure in church history?
That you would say that person gets to pick you a bottle out to drink, and then one person you're like, absolutely not that person.
Okay. I'm going to give two people that I like.
Okay.
Who I would trust, Gregory of Nyssa. I think, have you ever read any of Gregory Nyssa's stuff on where he's talking about the local culture? It's kind of interesting. He writes about, where he was in Nyssa. He's he writes about how elevated everybody was at that point in history, which I think now we think everyone's smarter and knows more than they did back then. That's not the case. He's like, you can't bump into a shoe shiner or a delivery boy or a baker that won't debate with you the finer points of Christological difference in the ousia or hypostasis of the Godhead. And he's like, they're all debating and arguing these different things. And there's more to it than that, but there's something that tells me that Nyssa appreciated culture, right? Education and understanding, where I think if he was picking out a wine, I can't imagine he would just pick one like crazy.
Nice.
The person I wouldn't trust, who I like just as much, if not more than Nyssa, who influenced Nyssa, is Origen. Okay. Origen, one of the goats to ever do it, right? I love talking about Origen because people like to say he was a heretic. They're idiots. All of the church fathers after Nyssa or after Origen loved Origen. Benedict said that he was one of the best theologians of all time, up to recently. But despite his theology being so good, he was such a wild man. He was so willing to buck, right? His doctrine that really got condemned wasn't just apokatastasis or universal salvation. It was the preexistence of souls, which is such a wild and out there idea for everybody else in Christianity. But he also just took things so extreme, right? I'm pretty sure he castrated himself because he was lusting. And
really?
One time he threw himself into a bushel of thorns. He was so ascetic in nature. I can't imagine him enjoying himself and really knowing, what to do.
I think, Colten, as a general rule, if you have castrated yourself, you should not be allowed to pick wine for other people. I feel safe to make that rule on this podcast right now.
I do. I really hope I'm not slandering Origen. I hope I'm not inventing that fact. Yes, he did castrate himself. Okay, as a young man because of lust. Okay, I Googled it just now.
Yeah,
I remember.
I feel like you're automatically out of the running to pick wine for anybody.
I'm not tasting anything that he puts on my table. I'll take his exegetical approach to understanding God in the Old Testament and the New Testament any day, reading scripture in the school of Christ. Not taking wine recommendations from Origen.
That might be one of the most interesting answers we've had yet to that question. Well done. All right, you're going to have a lot of options on the next one. What is something you used to believe that it turned out later you were wrong about?
Everything. everything. I'll just go most recently, and instead of giving you something trivial that came to mind first, I'll say that you can have socialism in one state. I was on one for a week or two about China. I was in my China era, loving it. I think there's some of what I'm about to say is still correct, but this idea that China embraced the Deng reforms and brought capitalism back into communist China in order to enhance industrialization, because Marx wrote about how you can't have a socialist communist society without industrializing first. So communism or capitalism might be a required and necessary step in the economic development of things. And so what China's doing is they're on this 50-year plan, which is what they say, to get to full communism. They're phasing out capitalism. But I posted a video about that, and I just got roasted by Maoists in my comments who were like, you clearly haven't read Marx's letter to Sulich. You clearly haven't read Mao on Contradiction. And then I did read those things, and I was like, oh yeah, I was not really thinking very clearly about how Marx was writing for a European context and how he said this would develop differently in different cultures, and about how Lenin and Mao are very clear that you cannot have communism or socialism develop in a single country like China's trying to do, because if it's surrounded by global capital, it'll either be crushed or be co-opted like Stalin did with state capitalism in the USSR.
Wow.
I was wrong. They got me in the comments. They changed my mind.
I think people are realizing why you're getting a lot of views on social media.
I think most people though who talk about that stuff, I never imagined it would convert.
I love
Praise
it.
God.
What do you see as the main issue facing Christianity in America today?
And as you ask me that question, I think of something, and then I'm thinking of what I think is the root of that, and then I think is the root of that. But I think theological education, probably the fundamental root. A lack of theological education is leading to a dramatic misfiring in so many ways that it's hard to then pluck and name them all. And I think that I hate this concept of this term deconstruction. And I know I sound, Britt Hartley, No Nonsense Spirituality, called me out for this take where she was like, you're just trying to sound different. I love Britt. She was like, you're just trying to sound different. And maybe that's what it is. It's just when I was quote unquote, what we call deconstructing now, that term hadn't been coined, that metaphor hadn't been yet misappropriated from Derrida to mean something that that Derrida didn't even mean that it means yet, and then spread all around the place. But I was changing my faith, but my way of thinking about it was I'm learning and growing. I'm unlearning stuff that was bad, and I'm learning stuff that's good. And I'm developing my ability and capacity to interrogate my own assumptions and think differently. And then this idea of deconstruction came along, which, as I already said, does not mean what Derrida means by deconstructing the way that we use it. And all of a sudden now it's directionally focused. I'm dismantling things. And then that leads people to the question of, well, should we reconstruct? Well, no, you shouldn't reconstruct, because if you reconstruct, that's a prescription. And it's all right, you shouldn't tell people to reconstruct. I don't know. What was the question? I know this does tie back to your question. I just
what do you see as the main issue in Christianity today?
The main issue of Christianity. And so I think what most people call deconstruction today is just learning stuff, because it's like what people who aren't in seminary call learning about theology. Because everyone else that's going to seminary is learning if they're at a good seminary and not just an indoctrination camp for your denomination, because there's a big difference.
Yeah.
If you're in a real seminary, you're unlearning a lot of bad doctrines. I went to ORU. From my bio, I was lucky. Weird enough, ORU is not a Bible college, so it's a D1 university that accidentally brings in good professors all the time, despite the president of the university, what he wants to do. He's a douchebag. He's got me banned from all this school social media. That's a whole other story. He wishes it was an indoctrination camp, but these people got tenure. And so we were just learning, getting a theological education from people who were still Christians, pastors even in a lot of cases, but that the Bible has contradictions in it. Yeah, you should read the Old Testament through the lens of Jesus, and your hermeneutic should understand that just because the Old Testament says that God did this doesn't mean God did this. If it looks different than how Jesus looked, all those things that we're learning in the deconstruction space was just theological education. But framing it as deconstruction to me feels so narrow and limiting and prescriptive, overly prescriptive, that I'm just like, if we, and then it creates defensiveness where people are like, well, don't deconstruct, don't get around that. If we just had a better, like, if we had better theological education, it'd be harder for people to be drawn into Christian nationalism. It'd be harder for people to be brought into dogmas that harm and hurt people, I think, right? And even at ORU, right, like, I had professors that were Catholic charismatics, United Church of Christ professors, Methodist professors, Greek Orthodox professor, Baptist professors, Pentecostal professors, Anglican professor, like, and they were all colleagues that worked together. So when you learn to study theology from that kind of like ecumenical approach that's looking at everything, they're not going to be constantly insulting their peers in their class. You know, it just creates things differently. I think that if there's few people I know with a good theological education who can be Christian nationalists. It's always people who went to some indoctrination camp from, you know, some Joel Webbin guy who recently made a video about how black people aren't educated enough to be pastors. They haven't gone through enough theological education. And I'm like, dude, you don't even know anything. Like, let's quiz you. You know, I just want to I want to catch them live and just do a quiz on theological terms. You know, what is univocity of being? What is voluntarism and univocity of being? Because your theology reeks of it and you've probably never even heard the words. You don't even know who John Duns Scotus is or William of Ockham is and why they destroyed your theology so badly. Anyways.
I wish you were a little bit passionate about it. That would be great.
Yeah,
just a little bit passionate.
Can you believe I'm an atheist? I'm like so passionate about Christian theology.
It's what's so fascinating. What is something blowing your mind right now that you're learning?
Oh my gosh. Oh, that is such a good question. What's blowing my mind right now that I'm learning? That Steve Bannon calls himself a Leninist. Have you heard this?
Okay. No, I have not.
So normally you think of Leninism as like a left-wing ideology, right? Like Marxist Leninists, right? But Bannon like openly refers to himself as a Leninist because he's like, hey, well, Marxism is the political is the economic philosophy, right? Materialist philosophy, and Leninism is like the political strategy to bring that about, plus more of the philosophy on top of it. But in large ways, it's a political philosophy of structuring revolution. And so he's like, yeah, I apply Leninist like revolutionary politics to like what we're trying to do. He doesn't say with fascist. He's basically trying to bring about fascism through Leninist means. And so like they have developed a vanguard, right? Like this is like a core tenet of Lenin. They developed an intellectual vanguard of young people who are being like indoctrinated through think tanks that they are training up and raising up to replace the entire bureaucracy of the United States. So he says, I'm a Leninist. I don't want to reform the United States of America. I want to completely tear all of it down to the ground and rebuild it from something brand new. And he's like, we have 5,000 people or 10,000 people. The first 3,000 are already in place. And the next wave of 7,000 are about to be put in. That's why we need it. He says, that's why we need a third term. I watched this talk he gave at something. It's crazy they can just say this stuff out loud. Yeah. And so like their aim is the destruction of democracy. As Peter Thiel says, democracy is an outdated software and America has to get over its dictator phobia. And so what's blowing my mind is that these people can have such unbelievable, unhinged, un-American, anti-American political ideology and strategy and talk about it so loudly, and yet no one seems to hear it.
Come on. I hear you.
Blows my mind.
What's a problem you're trying to solve?
Theological education. So I'm working on like beyond my content. I'm in the process of creating, I guess you'd call them like the e-commerce word is digital products.
Yeah.
I think about them as survey level courses in theology overviews. So that's what I want to start with. I eventually want to be able to do courses. So I went $180,000 into debt so that I could, get the theological education that I got that I'm so glad everybody can't go $180,000 into debt for that. And so there's got to be some kind of a solution. And there's people out there that have bad versions of this that are teaching that are basically little indoctrination camps. I've referenced one of them earlier before we started recording, right? And these things are dangerous. Something's got to be done. I think St. Stephen's University, there are some schools that are offering different classes and things you can take, and those are beautiful. I don't ever want to I'm not trying to start a seminary, but I want to provide like an on-ramp that maybe could lead people to things like that. Maybe they can start studying a little bit more. So my first 3 things I have coming out soon are a survey overview on Christology and Trinitarian theology, a survey and overview on the doctrine of soteriology, the doctrines of soteriology, and then one on Christian ethics, how they developed throughout Christian history, everything that has been said notable about these different things, who said them, how they developed and morphed from one thing into another or reverted back into another thing, to just try to give people a clear overview of the multiplicity and diversity of thought that is the history of Christian theology. It is not just a couple of things. It's often taught to people as, well, then people believe this, then the Reformation happened, and then they believe this, and then the Great Awakening happened, and then they believe this, and they don't understand that actually so many different things have been said throughout all of it. And David Bentley Hart talks about like the generous, he calls it like a generous, oh man, I'm not going to butcher a David Bentley Hart quote. You know what I mean? A cosmopolitanism, a generous cosmopolitanism, right, is the history of Christian thought. In his book, Tradition and Apocalypse, is like a great overview to understand what Christian tradition actually means. So I think that's a problem I'm trying to solve and how I'm trying to solve it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to sell them for like $4 or something like that. I'm make a video about the topic and then be like, if you want to know more about Christology, put Christology in the comments, and then they'll get a DM with a link to a $4. Because if I'm going to take time away from my wife and kids, I've got to be compensated for it. You know what I mean?
I think you can charge more than $4, but I'll just
maybe
I'll
they're
leave
going to be
that out
like
there for you.
15 pages long. They're going to be like nice little overviews, and then maybe I can develop courses or something after that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I like that. Okay, maybe it's similar. What's something you're excited about right now?
Okay. Well, I was excited about taking my kids to Great Wolf Lodge this weekend, but now everybody's sick, and I have to just, after we get off of the air, I have to call them and beg them to transfer us to another weekend. So less stoked about, because my kid, my 4-year-old loves water slides, man. So we were about to have a great time. Other than that, I work with a nonprofit that my friend and I started. He runs it. He's the executive director, and I'm just on the board now, called the Black Legacy Advancement Coalition, Black, BLAC, based in Detroit. We do job training, job skills, life skills, housing procurement. We have a men's house and a women's house. We're working on building a 100-unit apartment building with mixed-use retail. We're going to use that money to subsidize the housing above, to try to help make sure that as money pours into Detroit, these communities aren't displaced. We do a lot of different stuff, and we just got back, man. We got excited, welcomed and accepted into Harvard Business School's Upswell Forum for social entrepreneurs working in communities of color. It's a very long name. And we were at Harvard Business School for a week last week in like from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., learning from Harvard business professors how to scale and grow, fundraise our nonprofit, and make a bigger impact. And we got to hear from some just unbelievable leaders outside of Harvard Business School, like Tulane Montgomery, who runs New Profit, which is like the original venture philanthropy firm that like launched a bunch of big nonprofits. We got to hear from Gerald Tertavian, who's like the founder and former CEO of Year Up, who basically gave us like the world's greatest masterclass in fundraising. And so now we have that program going to continue for like 4 more months virtually, online. But so I made unbelievable new friends. There was 10 nonprofits selected. We each got to send 3 representatives. So made some unbelievable connections and friends, and learned a lot that I think we're going to be able to make so much of a bigger impact with Black this year than we have been around for 5 years. I think this is going to be our most impactful year in our community yet. So I'm pumped about that.
Wow, that sounds awesome. All right, Colten, is there anything that we have not addressed? We've gone all over the map. We didn't get to all my questions, but is there anything before we close this episode that you're like, look, we can't close this unless I say this, that you gotta fit in before we wrap this up?
Yeah, man. You guys, listen, there's this guy here named Jeremy Jernigan who is just popping off on social media. If you're not following him, you need to already. If you just came across this and you're like, what is this? Then you need to actually hit follow, like, subscribe. And then beyond that, guys, he has a brand new book coming out soon. I hope you're telling people about it already, called The Edge of the Inside. I have the opportunity to be an advanced reader, and I've been digging into it, and it's so far, it's incredible. So make a note of that for the launch date when that comes out, and buy that book.
Wow. I'll pay you the check that I promised you to say all that. That was great.
Yeah, no, you didn't ask me to do that at all, folks.
That was very kind of you. That was not what I was asking you to say, but that was very kind of you. And I am stoked that you're on our launch team. That's I was very touched by that. All right. So people who are like, I like this guy. This guy's wild and crazy and has got some great ideas. What's the best way for them to connect with you online?
Great question. Instagram and TikTok at Colten Barnaby, Colten, not
yes,
O-N.
I got this wrong a few times, and I had to apologize to him.
Never trust a Colten with an O-N, right? Never. But also, you won't find me, right? There's a couple good ones. And then on Substack, Kensington Cone, Koan, or you can just do Colten Barnaby. It'll probably come up. My Substack is free. Check it out. Podcast, Ask the Next Question, is on YouTube. It's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you listen to podcasts. And then I have a personal YouTube that I should start uploading to Colten Barnaby 1, but I don't really do much there.
You've got a few other things going on, Colten. So
a couple things.
It's okay. Well, hey, this has been an absolute delight. You are as pleasant in real life as you come across in your videos. And to have a mix of someone with your intellect and your friendly, kind, sweet demeanor is rare these days. So thank you from all of us who get to enjoy your content for the work that you're doing, the posture in which you do it. And thanks for sharing your journey with us today. I think it's going to be hugely encouraging for a lot of our listeners.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Just block Greg Boyd, whatever you do. I'm terrified of my heroes ever seeing anything that I put out there. So just make sure Greg Boyd never sees this, please. Block him from this specific video.
I can't make a promise to that. He might see it, but you need to meet Greg Boyd. You guys would absolutely love each other, and I think he would dig the work that you're doing. So thanks for taking the time. Thank you, listeners, for joining us on another episode. We will see you all on the next one.